All right. Well, I don't know. I said I was quitting cussing for Lent at some point, and I made a 50-minute video this morning, and poof, it just completely disappeared. And by my recollection, I hadn't cussed about it, so I'm kind of proud, although troubled that the video disappeared. All right, so I'm trying again. I'm going to try to keep it to 40 minutes here. So there's a little preview. Let's pretend I'm throwing out Jolly Ranchers and we're pick a number. And somebody got it, and you got a couple of Jolly Ranchers right there, so that's good. All right. So see how many of those you can answer right quick. Pause it. Okay, here we go, Carter. So we're kind of just we're moving by president from this point forward. So we got Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Obama, Trump. All right. And I guess maybe something on the election of Trump. I really don't think the Trump presidency, the 4 years of the Trump presidency, are testable on the AP test. But, the Obama, it might be we need to work on Obama a little bit. But Carter. All right. So think about the context. And I need to send you some like sad songs from the 1970s, Springsteen songs. Springsteen kind of comes of age in the late 70s, or really early 70s, and like his first really mature music is late 70s. That kind of has a finger on the pulse of kind of the culture and the way we're feeling. And so coming out of Vietnam and Watergate, everybody's feeling bad, and the trust in government's going down. And Ford, who was a good guy, but he's associated with Nixon and everything, and he pardoned the crook, yada yada yada. So Carter has this new opportunity. The time is right for a Southern religious Democrat. So he's pro civil rights. He's really religious, so he can claim, I'm not going to lie like these other guys do. So his campaign has an outsider at the time. People are kind of disgusted with Washington, D.C. So campaigning as an outsider never hurts when you're running for president in recent years. And so that helped him. So he gets elected, real close election against Ford. Right away, he starts looking weak. He pardoned, right here you see, folks who dodged the draft, went to Canada during the draft, and, so it's an amnesty. It's kind of like the Confederates that Andrew Johnson and Lincoln are doing. They've broken the law, they've dodged the draft, and now they can come back and, fill out some paperwork, and they get pardoned for not going to Vietnam. Also, the Panama Canal Treaty said we'd keep the canal, we'd run it for like 50 years, but then give it back to Panama. So he's honoring that treaty. Ford had said he was going to do it too. Carter had kind of shied away from talking about it during the election. But as president, he says, okay, we're going to give it back to Panama. And Republicans really don't like that because they feel both of those things Carter's coming out of the gate as president, making us look weak. You don't have to be a soldier. We're not projecting American power. He's kind of the opposite of Teddy Roosevelt. And what he's going to do for his main policy, he's going to kind of try to take the civil rights movement that impacted him so much as a Southerner. He had grown up in Plains, Georgia, and his parents were kind of distant to him, and so like the maid kind of raised him. He grew up. All his playmates as kids were African Americans, like on the farm, the peanut farm, so he's got this deep feeling. He's kind of moderate on like his political positions, but deep feeling for civil rights. He was a nuclear engineer, so doesn't really have much of a philosophy. If people such as me yearn for a principled moderate, in today's politics, somebody not too far right, not too far left, honest, good character, who's just going to try to take a centrist position on a lot of things without necessarily some overriding ideology. Well, that's Carter. So you got to be careful what you wish for sometimes because it's not going to go very well for him. So really his only philosophy is he's going to emphasize human rights in foreign policy. He's taking the civil rights movement global. And we're only going to be friends. We're only going to give aid to countries that don't torture their people and treat their people right. And so he's the most idealistic president since Woodrow Wilson. And like Wilson, a very religious Southerner who can kind of come across as sanctimonious. All right, the economy, still stagflation, late 70s. Things don't get much better. I just got through reading a book about Carter, and the author gives him credit for maybe more economic success, economic growth better than other presidents around that time. Saying he doesn't get enough credit for his economic policies, but you still got stagflation. And his own party sees him as uppity and sanctimonious, and what was the word? Condescending. All right, condescending is the word that I believe John used. All right, and so he's condescending. All right, and so you look at that picture of him. He's thinking hard and he's smart and he's righteous, and you just ought to kind of take his word for it because he knows better than you. And I've got a picture with him. I went to my Sunday school class. Went to his Sunday school class 10 years ago or so. He still teaches Sunday school. He's the oldest living president. He's the oldest. He is the president who has lived the longest. He's like 94 now. He taught a real good class, but then he came around to get his picture made with us, and I was wanting to say, hey, I admire you, yada, yada, yada. I kind of see a lot of things like you do. I think you're right about a lot of things. And all he said to me was, hurry, 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 because he was trying to get to all the groups to take the picture because he had something else he had to get to. And I understand he's got a busy agenda as a former president and so forth, but it came close as a little condescending to me, and that, the one chance I got to talk to him, it wasn't, hey, how you doing? He didn't have time to talk to me. It's, the kind of the impression that he made on me. All right. Well, as president, foreign policy is very much of a mixed bag for him. He negotiated a SALT II. Remember, that was Nixon's treaty, SALT I, that's limited nuclear weapons. He negotiated SALT II with Brezhnev, but then it's clear that the Senate's not going to ratify it, so he just gives up on it. And the Senate said, again, he's just kind of giving too much to the Soviets, that the United States not getting anything out of it. His greatest success is going to be to make peace between Egypt and Israel. So today, when we think of the Middle East, we think of like Al-Qaeda and Afghanistan and maybe Iraq. Some of the stuff that we see going on today. All right, ISIS. But in the 60s, the chief culprit in terms of hating Israel was the country of Egypt, and they had attacked Israel twice. In 1967, and Israel beat them in the 6-day war, so it's lasted 6 days. Israel whooped them so bad, and then they lost to Israel again in 1973. So this fella here, Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, he goes to Israel. This guy's name is Menachem Begin. I like his name. Sees the leader of Israel and wants to make peace, and so they go to see Carter. At the presidential retreat. It's called Camp David. All right, and so the Camp David Accords are the treaty that they signed, and those two countries have been at peace ever since. So Israel's troubles have to do with terrorist groups, not an Arab country, thanks to this. And Carter was real, successful here because he was able to appeal to their common religious heritage, like the figures of the Old Testament, particularly like Abraham and Moses, are key religious figures for the Jewish people and for Muslims as well. So he knows that story, and it's the Holy Land, and he talked about that to them. So their common religious commitments kind of helped them overcome their divisions there. So that's his greatest thing that he achieved as president, really, the Camp David Accords. All right. But, there's more failure than there is success. So the Camp David is kind of the X statement on the overall failures, especially foreign policy failures for Carter. Remember Eisenhower. Eisenhower, as part of this kind of rollback, aggressive anti-communist posture, kind of the CIA installs this dictator, the Shah in Iran, and we can get cheap oil from Iran. Needed a friend in the Middle East, but he's a mean dictator. He's got a secret police, kill people if they oppose him. So during the Carter years, 1978, I think is the year, Carter, the Shah gets overthrown and the reason, and so the Shah gets overthrown, but then he gets cancer and he wants to come to the United States for medical treatment. At first Carter says no, but then finally says, well, it's not going to hurt anything to let him come here. So lets him come, and it certainly does hurt things. I mean, young Iranian students attacked the American embassy. They take, I think, originally 62 hostages. They let 12 of them go, but for over a year, they keep 50 of them. And this is really the first big political event that I remember well. Like every night on the news, it'd be day 20 of the hostage crisis, day 100 of the hostage crisis. And Carter couldn't get him out. Now, he could have, as he has said multiple times, could have bombed Iran. But if we attack Iran, they're going to kill the hostages. So by day, I don't know, 250, 300, something like that, he gets desperate. So he authorizes this rescue attempt. These helicopters, special forces go flying through the desert. And they get caught in a sandstorm and they crash into each other. And, pilots get killed before they even make it into Iran. So just really embarrassing. And we just feel weak again. It feels like same old. In Vietnam, it said the Iranians are not as impressive an opponent, but we're still losing because Carter's a wimp. All right, well, the Soviets, when presidents look weak, we've seen this with Kennedy, take advantage of that and they start expanding again. So they invade Afghanistan, and so Carter puts an embargo to grain shipments to Afghanistan and to the Russians. And he boycotts the Summer Olympics of 1980, which is understandable because they were held in Moscow. But, our athletes are upset about that and the supporters of our athletes. And we also give aid to, this word's going to be fun to say, the Mujahideen, the freedom fighters in Afghanistan who kind of hide out. They're kind of like the Viet Cong to the Soviets. There's no jungles to hide out in Afghanistan, but they hide out in caves and mountains. And so the Soviets, Afghanistan's kind of the Soviet Vietnam. They win all the battles, control the cities, but they can't ever catch all the rebels. And one of those rebels, a guy you may have heard of named Osama bin Laden. So in the Carter years, he wasn't somebody we knew his name. He was just one of the Mujahideen, but we were aiding Osama bin Laden, the guy who's going to be responsible for 9/11. All right, let me take a breath. Okay, so that's a good SAQ. So that's a phone. Other than tear down this wall, this is Ronald Reagan's most famous quote. All right, so you might pause it and tell yourself some answers to that stuff. Okay, other things to say. Take a look at that. Okay, and so here comes Reagan. All right. So hey, we got a little play on words. Reagan was once upon a time a Democrat. He was a New Dealer, supported the New Deal, and he only became a Republican kind of in response to the Cold War and the Great Society. He was a Republican governor of California during the 60s, took on kind of the student movement. Reagan Democrats were folks, kind of your quintessential Trump voter, working class Trump voter today, union members who didn't really like hippies and wanted to project a tougher image. And so although they were Democrats, they supported Reagan. A lot of Reagan Democrats, around here during the 1980s. When he runs for re-election, it's called the Morning in America. So things are better again. In fact, his 1980 campaign slogan was "Let's make America great again." Not quite as confrontational as Trump. Really good at being optimistic. You see that in the cowboy picture up there at the right, and then patriotic in the picture there. I can't find my cursor. There it is. Okay, sorry, I had in the picture in front of the flag there. All right, he was a former actor, not a great actor. There's like his most famous movie. He's like hanging out with a chimpanzee, but he's good in front of the camera. The acting skills and the camera skills really helped him in kind of choreographing his presidency. All right, there's a new group of people called the New Right, and this is kind of the next name for the folks that don't like the hippies. But they don't like the hippies for like religious issues. So Reagan's the first president who speaks out against abortion. The Roe versus Wade case was 1973. He speaks out against abortion, and it's the new left is kind of the hippies. And he's still the champion of the common man. Always helps to be on the side of the common man. But this time, the common man's enemy is not Rockefeller and Carnegie and big business, but it's the big government, taxing them to death, trying to tell them what to do with their paycheck. Okay. When the day gets inaugurated, the Iranians let the hostages go. So apparently, Iran felt like, he wouldn't mess around with them. So it's like, and they waited to let him go until after Reagan had taken office, after he'd been inaugurated. So one last chance to kind of thumb their nose at the hostages. There's the hostages getting off the plane there. All right, there's the quotes. In his inaugural address, he famously says, in this context. So back in the New Deal, it wasn't against the government, but in this context, government's not the solution to the problem, government is the problem. So he wants to cut taxes, wants the government to do less and leave people alone. All right, 6 weeks into his presidency, he gets shot. Guy tried to kill him, a guy named John Hinckley. He's, these guys, these assassins are always weird, kind of freak show kind of guys. So instead of impressing anarchists like Chalgosh was trying to do, or impress communists like Oswald was trying to do, he's trying to impress an actress. So, the weirdest of all of them, maybe. He's trying to impress an actress by the name of Jodie Foster. It's not a random thing. He's got a crush on her. She was the star of a movie called Taxi Driver in the late 70s, kind of about an alienated Vietnam vet. So it's kind of the movie that was the symbol of alienation and anger and cynicism in the late 1970s. And so he's got a crush on this particular actress. And if, like in the case with McKinley, the president is a symbol of everything that's gone wrong with the government, people don't trust the government, he feels like killing the president will impress this actress. All right. So strange story. All right, but here's Reagan uses it to his advantage. He wasn't a real popular president in the first 6 weeks, but he gets shot, and he's back to work 12 days later, and he's not breathing very well. The bullet, I think, punctures his lung one way or another, and the doctor's fixing to put him under and operate on him. So he doesn't know if he's going to live or die. He's having trouble breathing, and his last words before they operate on him is a joke. So, that's grace under pressure. If our last words are in some way profound, like Harriet Tubman, I go to prepare a place for you, or a joke, laugh in the face of death, that says something about our courage. And so he says to all the doctors, hey, I hope you're all Republicans. He's a Republican. So he doesn't want a Democrat operate on him. And so everybody hears about that joke, and so everybody becomes a fan of his on a personal level, even if they don't like his policies. Okay, his domestic policy, so he's got more of a philosophy domestically than Reagan does. So it's called Reaganomics. It's tax cuts at the same time that you think if you're cutting taxes, you're going to cut spending, and he does cut spending on anti-poverty, Great Society programs. But he spends more on the military. So even as he's bringing in less money, he's spending more money on the military because he's all tough, in the Cold War against the Soviets. All right. So it's called trickle-down economics, and the idea is if he cuts taxes for the rich, they're going to hire more people, and more people get jobs, more people will prosper, and they'll move up in tax brackets. And because folks move up in tax brackets, even though the tax rate is going to be less in these upper tax brackets, there's going to be more tax revenue because so many people are prospering and flourishing and moving up in tax bracket. All right, so it's called trickle-down economics, Reaganomics. His vice president, when he was running against Reagan in 1980, called it voodoo economics. So he said there's no way this is actually going to work. All right, but it worked in some ways. There was a boom. There was a recession in the early 80s, and there's a big boom after 1982. And so the economy flourishes. You do have inequality. All right. And so it was kind of Gilded Age kind of economic, hierarchical structure. So in the inner cities, the crime goes up. There's a big deficit. He said there wouldn't be a deficit, but in fact there was a big deficit. All right, yuppies are the symbol of Reaganomics. It's like baby boomer kids who are now like 40 years old and they're driving a BMW and they're making a lot of money. And kind of the other symbol of the of the inequality is the gangs of the inner cities. The inner cities become kind of unlivable. You got the Crips and the Bloods fighting over the crack cocaine trade, and rap music is created kind of as protest music of the '80s. Maybe the most famous rap group of the '80s is a group named Run DMC, and a lot of times today rap songs are kind of crap about like sex and glorifying selling drugs. Run DMC, had some kind of protest kind of lyrics. So the stanza talks all about crime in the cities, and then the chorus goes, "Don't," and I can't remember what it rhymed with, but he says, "Don't ask me because I don't know why, and it's like that, and it's the way it is." And so he's saying, I don't understand what's going on, but I'm just kind of a street reporter telling you about it, and I'm not happy about it. And hey, I'll send you a film. I'll send you a film that goes with it. That's pretty good. Does a pretty good job of showing Reagan. All right, it's that 20th century film. Okay, so review it. Halfway there. Hopefully, I'm at 20 minutes or less. Okay, there's our preview. So we're going his big successes here. All right, let's go. We're gonna make it a number 3. All right. Hey, maybe there's time to do that. I always feel like it helps to make these things the right number if I can, but maybe I can't. Where's the cursor? I see it. I see it. Boom, baby. All right, there it is. So now we're going back up. All right. And so Reagan hates on the Soviets. So no more of this detente stuff like Nixon and Carter wanted. He's going to, instead of easing tensions, he's going to increase tensions. And so he calls them evil. The most famous movie of the time was Star Wars, which was really kind of a allegory of the Cold War. And so he borrows the phrase evil empire from Star Wars, and he calls them the focus of evil in the modern world. And so he's saying we're stronger in our foreign policy now. Plus, we're not going to be like hippies and say, hey, don't judge. I'm okay, you're okay was the name of some book. Hey, there's right and there's wrong, there's good and there's evil, and the United States is good, and communism's evil. So he spends a whole lot more money on the military, and the thinking is they'll have to do it too, and they don't have the money to do it. Capitalism is a better revenue generating economic system than communism is, so they won't be able to keep up in the arms race. Is the thinking. All right. So he comes up with this. I don't know. Critics said it was a crazy theory. All right, so this is what I want you to imagine. It's called Strategic Defense Initiative, and it would put laser shooting satellites up in the sky. So there they are. So if the Soviets attacked us with missiles, our satellites would be able to laser beam shoot these missiles down. So I want you to imagine. Let's do the most risky demonstration imaginable since we got to imagine. Imagine that I'm holding like my sword as a big zapper, and I've climbed up on top of a desk in the middle of the room, and I've got it. I'm going like zap, 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 zap. All right? No. Let's not imagine me. Let's imagine one of the students do. And it's like a reckless student, like a crazy student. You can decide who the crazy student is, Braylon or somebody else. But I get them climbing up on the desk, and we're all worried that the desk is going to fall, and they're going to bust it and hurt themselves, and they're going to get hurt. I'm going to get in trouble because I caused a student. But it's all hypothetical, so it's not really, it's not really hurting anybody. So the desk is looking shaky, and we're practicing. They're saying zap, zap. So I'm going to be the evil empire. And I've got all my magic markers, my dry erase markers, and they're all missiles, and I'm going to throw them at y'all. And y'all's part in it is y'all are the poor, helpless American victims of my nuclear attack. All right, so, hey, evil empire attacks the poor American people. Take one. So I'm throwing my stuff at you, and Braylon or whoever up there is zapping them. He's zapping them with laser beams, and he knocks like, I don't know, a lot of them out of my hand. And so then I say cut, and I say, did it work? And so at first everybody says yes, but then a very perceptive student says, well, no, because you still got one dry erase marker in your hand, meaning a few of them got through. And so like the critic said, this thing could be 99% effective, but you still get, a few missiles get through, we're all dead. Plus it's going to cost an arm and a leg. So it costs $1 jillion, it's not going to be 100% effective, so it's stupid. So they called it Star Wars after the movie. All right. Well, it worked. All right, and it worked, in a strange way. We never even put any satellites up there. All right, but think about the logic or the arms race, like Reagan was talking about. When we built an atomic bomb, they built one. We built a hydrogen bomb, they built one. They put Sputnik up there, we put one up there. And then you have the race to the moon. So Reagan's basically challenging the Soviets to a race to put a big zapper in the sky. And that freaks out their leaders, the new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, who's a reformer who kind of feels like the communist system's not working. And so he wants more free speech. The name for that is glasnost, or openness, and more free markets. The name for that is perestroika, or restructuring. But the only way his reforms are going to work is if he doesn't have to spend $1 gajillion on a zapper in the sky. So he goes to Reagan and starts talking about peace and arms reduction. At one point, he offers to get rid of all their nuclear weapons. All right, so after they kind of do a little dance and they have several meetings, they finally sign this thing. So they're there signing it, the INF Treaty, which bans an entire class of weapons. That's the first time you're getting rid of weapons. Remember, the SALT limited the production of weapons, but this is banning weapons. And so it's not long range, called ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles. It's not short range, submarine launched ballistic missiles. It's missiles be launched from like the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. But just the whole notion that you're getting rid of a bunch of weapons really establishes this new and kind of permanent detente. Within a few years, Cold War is going to be over. All right, historians, Reagan fans give him credit for it, saying, hey, he won the thing by breaking the Soviet economy. And then, like Reagan critics said, hey, no, we got lucky that Gorbachev was a real reformer here because he's the guy coming to Reagan. That if Reagan had had a more warlike guy to deal with, we might all not be here and we might have got a nuclear war. But I mean, this is a big time thing. Reagan won the Cold War. He kind of gets credit, so it puts him in as a top 10, maybe a top 5 president, top 2 presidents of the 20th century, Roosevelt and Reagan. I think most historians would say. Always a top, anytime there's a survey of historians, no matter where they put a particular president, they divide them into 4 quadrants. Reagan's always up there in quadrant 1 with, Lincoln and Washington and the Roosevelts. Okay, now some things. So here's your ex statement on him. I mean, some things went wrong, even in foreign policy. So there's Middle East peace. There's a civil war in a country called Lebanon, which is just north of Israel. It's a really diverse country religiously. So there's Muslims, there's Christians. Israel had a presence there. So they got this civil war going on there. And so he sends Marines to Lebanon to try to keep the peace. And a suicide bomber drives a truck into their barracks and kills 200. And so he just has to pull them out. But it doesn't hurt his poll number. So like Democratic critics called him the Teflon president. Teflon's this cooking material that nothing sticks to. So, I mean, their argument is bad stuff happens under Reagan, but it doesn't seem to stick to him. It doesn't make him any less popular, and they don't really understand why. Okay, here's his most controversial thing. I'm going to send you a cute little video to go with it from the thing Family Guy, but after I get through, because I got to get this thing, I got to get this thing to upload right, blah, blah, blah. But at any rate, this guy Reagan wanted to send weapons to anti-communist freedom fighters in Nicaragua. Nicaragua is this Central American country that socialists had been elected to power or, maybe taken power by a military coup, but they had the power. So it's like Cuba Part 2. You've got a socialist government there and kind of a communist government. And he doesn't want to do a Bay of Pigs. There's not that many Nicaraguan refugees in the United States anyway, but there are folks in the country that were like part of the former kind of really conservative, kind of elitist government. They want to overthrow the socialist government. So these folks are counter-revolutionaries, or Contras for short. So he just wants to give them weapons and give them military aid. But Congress, which is run by the Democrats, doesn't want to do it. They want to spend less money on the military. So they passed this bill saying he's not allowed to, the Bolin Amendment to like the military budget that year. He's not allowed to send any money to the Contras. Okay, so he can't do it. Until this guy who works for the National Security Council, Oliver North, comes along. So Oliver North comes up with this scheme, and he sells weapons to our enemy, Iran. Remember Iran from the hostage crisis today? And he trades these weapons for hostages in Lebanon. There's some American hostages in Lebanon, and that seems kind of weak and wimpy that we would be trading arms for hostages. On top of that, he overcharges them for the weapons, and they're fighting this war against Iraq, and we're officially on the side of Iraq in this war, so there's all kinds of shady stuff going on. Hard to follow. But then he takes his profits and he buys weapons and he sends them to the Contras illegally. So then he gets in trouble for it, and we have to testify before Congress about it. He says Reagan knew. So it's kind of the Nixon question about Watergate. What did Reagan know and when did he know it? And Reagan's answer is, well, I forgot. I can't remember if I did that. I don't think I did. At one point he comes on TV and says, I didn't think I traded arms for hostages. That's the way I remember it, but the facts say otherwise. So he's like, almost pleading that he's senile, so that he's got, later on he's going to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so people are, can't be blamed because he's old. And he's, at that time, he's the oldest president ever in office. If Trump gets reelected, he'll be the oldest if he serves eight years. All right. But it didn't go well for him, but it didn't hurt him all that much. All right. Reagan, he's still pretty popular at the end of his time in office. Okay. As far as his Supreme Court appointments, he appoints conservative Republicans to the Supreme Court. He appoints a Republican lady to the Supreme Court, first lady to be on the Supreme Court, named Sandra Day O'Connor. So, hey, the moral majority, where are they? Remember them? The New Right, these Christians. All right, they're fired up about it, and they think his appointments are going to get the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade and end abortion. They don't. All right, you got a couple of abortion cases, and the result of these cases, the Webster and the Casey case, is it makes abortion a little harder to get. In Pennsylvania, there's a Pennsylvania case, the Casey case, and it says, hey, public hospitals can't provide abortion. Taxpayer money can't pay for abortions. They got to be private abortion clinics. And then the Webster case says that... yeah, that's the Webster case. No tax money funded abortions. And then the Casey case says that in Pennsylvania, Casey was a pro-life Democratic governor, signs this law. It says in Pennsylvania, if a teenager wants an abortion, a minor wants an abortion, she's got to get her parents' approval, consent, or if she lives on her own, a judge's consent. And so some states, and I think Georgia has passed that kind of consent requirements for teenagers. So it makes it a little harder to get an abortion. It doesn't really cut into the numbers on abortion. It was still like 1 million a year during the Reagan years. It's a little less than that now, maybe 700,000 a year. And the number of abortions kind of tends to vary with the economy more than whether it's Democrat or Republican in office. You got a good economy, you have less abortions. You have more poverty, it tends to be more abortions. Okay. Pause it, ask them. All right, there's our preview. There's a good thing to cap. All right, and so this means that since we won the war in Iraq, Bush, the point of view, pro-American, self-esteem, because we won a big war again, and we won real easy. So it's kind of overcoming this inferiority complex that we had with Vietnam. All right, so here we go. All right, H.W. Bush, who died last year, last fall of 2019. Fall of 2018. Most qualified guy we've ever had run for president. He goes down in history as the greatest one-term president, I think, according to most historians. Right up there with Polk, and I think he beats out Polk because although Polk was very successful, he was successful kind of at doing questionable things, taking land away from Mexico, whereas most of the stuff Bush is doing is pretty good. All right, when he runs for president, one of the things he says to the Republican convention is, read my lips, no new taxes. So, he's saying he's kind of going to be like Reagan with keeping the tax cuts. He goes back on this, so it's going to hurt him. But when he becomes president, the Cold War's coming to an end. So he's kind of managing the end of the Cold War. So the first thing that happens in China. students in China rise up and protest against the government. All right, and they protest in this place as kind of the symbol of Chinese communism downtown Beijing called Tiananmen Square. Big picture of Mao's hanging there. And for a while, the government kind of lets them, and so it's inspirational. We're watching on CNN. They construct this big like paper mache version of the Statue of Liberty. They call it the Liberty Statue or something like that. And then when the government sends in tanks to put it down, this college kid stands in front of the tanks and stops the tanks. And tanks are big and awkward, so they kind of shift and try to go around him one way. He scoots over, and they shift and they go around him the other way, and he scoots over. And so I mean, everybody's talking about how one person can make a difference, and it's inspirational. But it's about just a few days. A few days later, at night, the tanks come back in. They kill people. They squash people that got in the way. Nobody knows where this kid is. You know, he got thrown in jail. And so we're kind of sad about the communists holding on, because one of the things the communist government did in China was kept, coronavirus kind of quiet for a while. Looks like they've done a good job of combating coronavirus there in Wuhan. But they didn't like the PR to start off with, and so, for a while the government did a bad job with that, because, communist governments don't allow free speech. They heroic doctor there in China tried to tell everybody about it, and he got thrown in jail or something. He ended up dying. Okay, so, I mean, communism held in China. All right, well, it falls in Eastern Europe, all right, and Gorbachev, lets protesters overthrow the communist governments of Eastern Europe. All right, the Berlin Wall fell in 1989. Germany ends up being reunified. We saw that as a miracle. I never thought, I was in college, and the Berlin Wall had been there my whole life, and I thought it would be there my whole life. So everybody was amazed that it was falling. Teacher friend of mine in the late 90s went to Germany, bought a piece of it. They sold pieces of the wall. There's a guy like knocking it down right there. Young people. I lost it, just like anything else. But for a few years there, I had a piece of the Berlin Wall. All right. Well, here's a sad story. The communists tried to overthrow Gorbachev, and they launched a coup, and they took him hostage. So here's the sad part about it. He ended up getting let go, and the coup failed. So he's hostage for, I can't remember, a few weeks there. But this happened when I was student teaching, and I was listening to it on the radio when I was student teaching. I was driving to work. I was driving from home to Cedartown, and my reception wasn't good on the radio, and the sun was in my eyes. I couldn't tell what color the light was. Anyway, I ran a red light, and I caused a big wreck, and I ran into my elementary school librarian, and I totaled my car. And it was really scary. I was like flipping, these cars. It was a SUV, and they don't hurt people when they get in big wrecks, but they flip. So it was real scary, and I was flipping. I was going, and it looked to me like I was going to flip into oncoming traffic. And luckily for me, it stopped in like the turn lane, and I got out, and the librarian was mad at me. She forgave me later. This guy was like rubbernecking. Rubbernecking is when you stop the car, you slow down to see the damage, and this guy kept driving around because my car looked bad. He kept seeing the dead guy, and I'm looking at him and saying, "Hey, I'm sorry, I'm feeling fine. I know you wish I was dead." So kind of sad reflection on human nature, yada yada yada. So I mean, there's my story with this. All right. Eventually, Gorbachev is replaced by this fella, Boris Yeltsin, and eventually the Soviet Union splits into this confederation called the Commonwealth of Independent States, but pretty soon that falls apart, so it just becomes Russia and the Ukraine that we're aware of, and Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, all the republics. And I think there are like 15 of them, all become independent, so now the place is just Russia. Putin is the president of Russia, whereas the Soviet Union was a union of, I think, 15 communist republics. All right. Okie doke. All right, so after the war, the Cold War's coming to an end, Bush speaks of, hey, it's going to be a better world. It's going to be the new world order where we're not worried about nuclear war all the time. All right, but it turns out to be kind of a dangerous and kind of violent world in some ways. And so Yugoslavia is place number one where you see bad stuff happening. One thing the communists did was, because they repress civil liberties, groups that don't like each other can't do anything to each other. But once Yugoslavia gets its freedom, the different ethnic groups start killing each other. Remember, World War One kind of started in Yugoslavia, Serbia, and Francis Ferdinand and all that. That's a Yugoslavia story. And so you got Serbs in Yugoslavia killing other ethnic groups, Kosovars, Croats, Muslims. The guy behind it, he's my favorite evil man name, Slobodan Milosevic. Say that name fast, 3 times fast. Slobodan Milosevic, Slobodan Milosevic, Slobodan. Oh, I didn't get it right. Slobodan Milosevic. All right. And like Bush bombs them. And eventually, we defeat the Serbs, and Clinton's going to do it again. So, I mean, this New World Order is like capturing bad guys. All right. So, although bad guys rise during the New World Order, the non-Cold War world, for a little while there, things look pretty good. All right. Nelson Mandela, anti-apartheid activist in South Africa's pressure. South Africa, this apartheid's like a South African version of segregation, except in South Africa, the black Africans were like 97% of the population, and the white oppressors were this small minority. And so he'd been in jail for like 30 years. He wouldn't go Martin Luther King. He said, hey, if there's a war, we're going to win because we've got the numbers in South Africa. So he's like, kind of a combination of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. They're in South Africa. And so this international embargo, the world won't buy South African gold and diamonds, pressure South Africa into letting him out of jail. And then, apartheid ends, and he gets elected president of South Africa. The movie Invictus is really, really nice. Victus is a great poem. He liked the poem. I might send that one to you. All right. And so, I mean, inspirational story. This guy gets let out of jail, gets elected president, first black president of South Africa before there's a black president in the United States. All right, the Cold War's over, and so Bush kind of turns on this former friend of the United States, Manuel Noriega, in Panama. Haters of Noriega said his face looked like a pineapple. I don't know about that, but he was an anti-communist dictator in Panama, and it turned out he was also a drug runner in the United States, selling cocaine into the United States. So once there's no communism to fight against, hey, he ain't our friend anymore. So Bush says he wants to arrest him for selling drugs, and he won't submit to be arrested, so we invade Panama, and we capture him. He holds up in like a warehouse, and the military blasts rock and roll music in there, so finally he can't stand anymore, and he comes out. I can't remember what group it was. Twisted Sister, maybe? We're not gonna take it. No, we ain't gonna take it. That song, I think. I can't remember. But it might be them. But anyway, I think he just died. He died in prison. He's either still in prison or he died in prison. And so that was very successful. All right, here's the big war. Here's the Vietnam syndrome getting leaked. All right, we supported Iraq during the 80s in a war because the enemy of our enemy is our friend. So they had a mean dictator named Saddam Hussein, but they're in a war against our enemies from the hostage crisis, Iran. And so, they were our allies. But he thinks if he invades, if you look at Iraq shaped as kind of like a camel head here, maybe, the nose of the camel is this little bitty country of Kuwait, which is located right on the Persian Gulf, which is where all the oil tankers travel. All right, so these strategic sea lanes are the key to controlling oil in the world, really. And the tankers take the Middle Eastern oil to Europe and to the United States. So Saddam figures if he controls Kuwait, he controls the world's oil. So he invades Kuwait, and he thinks, hey, the United States likes me, okay, they're not going to do anything about it. Instead, Bush sees it as, we can't appease a dictator, so we got to contain him. So he orders him to get out. Well, Saddam won't do it. So first there's an embargo, he won't go. There's a threat to war, he won't go. So then we bombed the Iraqi troops in Kuwait for over a month. I was in college. I think I was a senior in college, and I had this mean professor kept telling me that I was going to have to go fight over there. I was going to get drafted. It's going to be Just like Vietnam, and all the guys going to get sent home in a body bag, and, we wouldn't get college deferments. So I was real scared. I remember going to my mom's class and saying, hey, at least 20,000 guys are going to die if we have to invade Kuwait. All right. Well, it turns out that the war only lasted 4 days. Like, as soon as we invaded, all the Iraqis just, there they are. They got white flags, and they're just dying to surrender. If they didn't surrender and they, try to go back to Iraq while we were bombing them, they would have been executed. So they're just dying to surrender. So it's like the most successful ground war ever. 4 days, less than 100 guys get killed. The general of the war is kind of a rock star. This guy's named Norman Schwarzkopf, a real personable guy, and the troops all love him. He's a tough guy. All right, the one mistake that Bush may have made is that he left Saddam in power. Once the Iraq withdraws back into out of Kuwait, back, and the troops back in Iraq, he leaves them there once they're out of Kuwait. All right, his son, kind of criticizes Bush for leaving Saddam in power. All right, at home, he's kind of moderate. He called for a kinder, gentler country than the Reaganomics, inequality. So he signs this law. Congress passed the law. Democratic Congress passed the law, the ADA, American Disabilities Act. That's why we have ramps in all the public buildings, including Calhoun High School. Because that's a requirement on construction projects today. And it's kind of him saying, hey, yeah, Reagan was a good president, but maybe we need to be a little kinder and gentler than, things were under Reagan. All right, he appoints the second African-American to be on the Supreme Court. Thurgood Marshall was the first. This guy, Clarence Thomas, is from Savannah, from Georgia, very conservative. Had originally been really liberal, but turned against affirmative action in college. And he is today the most conservative member of the Supreme Court. In the process by which he's being confirmed, a lady named Anita Hill, who had worked for him in the government, the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, accused him of sexual harassment. That's the first time I'd ever heard the term sexual harassment. He almost didn't get confirmed. He got real bitter about it, accused the committee of a high-tech lynching for hearing from this lady. From Anita Hill was her name. It's very similar if you followed the Kavanaugh nomination in the fall of 2018. Very similar confirmation process. All right, but he gets on there. For a while, Bush is a moderate, relatively successful president. His approval ratings were 90%, highest ever, right after Iraq leaves Kuwait. But then the economy goes bad. I'm Dr. McKenzie because I couldn't find a teaching job during the Bush recession. And unemployment gets up to 7%. Nothing like the 25% of the Great Depression. Not nearly as high as the 10, 11, 12% when Obama was getting elected because of the housing crisis. But still high enough to cause some discomfort. And I was one of the unemployed people for a little while there. So I went to grad school. All right, and there it is. And so that bad economy is going to lead to the election of Clinton. All right, let's keep our fingers crossed. Let's see how long this sucker is and see if I can get it uploaded.